BVP favors a syllabus made up of more difficult macro tasks, which serve as the anchors upon which daily end-class activities and mini-tasks are determined. One misconception is that all BVP advocates for in a class are tasks, when in fact much of class time is not spent on tasks. Rather, time is spent on other activities that provide students with the comprehensible input and interaction necessary to enable completion of the end-class activity or mini-task. What all forms of tasks have in common is that they require meaning to be interpreted or expressed for some non-linguistic outcome. This is enough for many people to think of them as communicative. Some activities commonly referred to as tasks, for example, spot the differences, jigsaw, and dictogloss, would not count as BVP tasks, since the information learned during the interaction is not then used to learn anything about the world. This does not mean they are not useful. Successful completion requires meaning to be interpreted, so there is opportunity for acquisition. Not everything done in the classroom has to be in service of a larger task. Task-based language teaching can be evaluated based on 4 main criteria. Number 1. What do tasks do for skill development? Obviously, output-oriented tasks are primarily about skill development, not acquisition. There is a risk of using output-oriented tasks for assessment purposes because then teachers may confuse the ends with the means. Teachers take shortcuts and lose sight of the nature of acquisition. They may have students rehearse similar output-oriented tasks as practice, and the students could then do well on the task. Really, you have a short-term behavior which won't transfer well to different tasks, and have provided minimal amounts of input. The macro task also becomes a restraint on what can be communicated about in a classroom. It is possible that the class be fully communicative, but not acquisition-rich. If you use tasks as acquisition opportunities, then they should still be input-oriented, regardless of the proficiency level of the students. How we acquire does not change with proficiency. In a K-12 program, do students ever get to the proficiency level by which the focus should shift from acquiring to practicing what they've acquired? Number 2. What do tasks do for acquisition? That is the input optimal? The input in an input-oriented task can be limited. The peer input during group work is likely to amount to less total input and be more linguistically restrained than when compared to pre-modified teacher input, and the interactionally modified input that can result from a teacher who interacts constantly with the class. After all, if the content is interesting, the modified input resulting from teacher interaction with one student serves as comprehensible input likely to be interpreted by the rest of the class. The input is not a problem if the input-oriented tasks are used as end-class or end-week goals, as BVP advocates, rather than the means of reaching those goals. Used as assessments, input-oriented tasks can promote positive watchback, and if you adopt a comprehension-based approach, then you have a way of aligning how you teach with how you test. Number 3. Is the purpose of the task interesting? I think interest is too often overlooked as a quality of optimal input. Rather, I see it as the essential starting point. No matter how good a teacher is at making his input comprehensible, it will matter little if students aren't interested enough to comprehend what he's saying. Therefore, tasks ought to be chosen because they contain the information students would want to get and learn. Tasks chosen because they prepare students to interact in situations where they to go abroad end up looking like tourist survival courses. Realistically speaking, these are not the immediate needs of most of the students in foreign language contexts. And lastly, number 4. Is it student-centered? Student-centered means that classroom procedures are level appropriate, correspond to a learner's interests and needs, and are best for learning, all of which can be met by a curriculum that uses tasks as mini and macro goals. The motivation for experiential learning in general education is because the more a student is doing, the better information is learned. This concept has to be modified in a second language classroom, since students are not doing something with language to learn something about language. Rather, doing should be equated with interpreting. In a student-centered, acquisition-rich classroom, students are actively engaged in interpreting input.